Hello, everyone. This is Joe Taylor here. I am the manager of the Door County Museum and Archives, and I'm going to give you a presentation today about the founder of our museum here, Harry Dankoler. And this program was originally part of the Door County Reads program, where everybody in the county that wants to can read a book, and we have different events that get together and we talk about that book and things that relate to it. So the book this year was a wonderful book called House on the Cerulean Sea, and it was about a group of children with extraordinary and magical powers that lived in an orphanage. And so it made us think. We did know that Harry had also spent some time in an orphanage. So we were going to use that as a basis of a presentation and really talk about this concept of, do those experiences of our youth, do they shape who we become later in life? So just think about that as we go through this and see what you think at the end here. So first of all, let's talk about who was Harry. So Harry, like I said earlier, he's kind of credited as the founder of our museum. There were several people involved, but Harry was really the driving force behind it. Here's a wonderful picture of him standing in front of our entrance, and over on the left there is a great illustration of what the building was to look like. It didn't quite end up exactly like that, but it was pretty close. So let's talk about first Harry the curator. We know that in 1929 is when he started planning the museum. He was involved with the Door County Historical Society, and him and some other people thought it was time we had a museum here in Door County. We actually did have a museum up in Washington Island at the time. The Jacobson Museum was up there, but in the main peninsula, I don't think there was any other museums at that time. And so Harry was really the one pushing for that to happen. Through various building designs and trials and tribulations, got to remember there was also a Great Depression going on right around now, but in 1939 they get the museum open, and Harry is 76 years old at this time. He is a curator for the first year of the museum, and a lot of the collection was largely his personal collection. But he had some health issues, and it caused him to step down. We don't know exactly what these health issues were. I mean, he was 76 years old at the time, but there are some indications that maybe the stress itself of trying to get this project completed really took a toll on him. But he does recover. He's feeling better, and in 1948 becomes the curator again, all the way to 1955. And 1955 is the year Harry dies at 92 years old. And when I first came to the museum, this was I just didn't really know who Harry was. I just saw this picture, and I'll be honest, it's like, oh, there's another old guy picture on the wall. And I didn't really appreciate him for who he was and hadn't really looked into his past. But working on this project and some other projects we've been doing, it's just been fascinating when we started learning a little bit more about Harry. So here's a few pictures of Harry in that same era. Harry was he loved to ice skate, and there's records of this since his childhood. He was a big ice skater. We've actually talked to a few people here at the museum that said the ice rink was actually right next door to the museum here at the time. It's kind of where the city of Sturgeon Bay's main parking lot is now. And the community would congregate around there, and Harry was often found out there. They would play the game. I think it was called Whip the Snake, where everybody kind of held hands on the ice skates, and whoever was at the end would kind of get whipped off until they couldn't hold on any longer. There's a couple other I think Harry was getting these other pictures here. Harry was getting honored in the lower right hand side photo for his work with the museum. He's getting serenaded in the top right hand side. That's just a wonderful photo. But this was in Harry's era of when he actually opened the museum. So let's go back to his beginnings, and let's learn about the young Harry here. So we know that in 1963, Harry was born in Door County. His mother and father were Prussian or German immigrants that came to Wisconsin and made their way here as homesteaders to the Sturgeon Bay region. Um, and as Harry's mother is pregnant with him, Harry's father leaves for the Civil War. So Harry never meets his father. And so in 1964, his father is killed in the Civil War. So right off the bat, he's kind of got this hanging over him that he just never knows who his father was, or at least not personally. He did have four siblings: his sister Agnes, his older brother Walter, older brother Ernest, and sister Clara. So actually, Harry was the youngest of the group. Um, but with his father dying in the Civil War in 1869, his mother just could not take care of all the kids. And um, from our understanding, we know that Harry was sent to an orphanage, and this was an orphanage, a soldiers' orphanage in Madison area. It's no longer there, but it was, I believe, it was actually for children of the Civil War whose parents were in the Civil War. Um, we think also his brother Ernest was there with him for a time. That was some new information we recently found, that we think Ernest was with him at that orphanage. Um, and we know in 1875, at the age of 12, is when he comes home from the orphanage. The orphanage had actually closed at the time, so I think all the kids that were there were either sent to new homes or returned to their original homes. So we have a picture here. This is a cabin on the left is their original homestead cabin of his parents. That was his mother Matilda and his father Ernst. Pictures of them. Now the people in the photo them itself of the cabin, that is Harry sitting in the window, and that's his sister Agnes standing in the doorway. Obviously, this was taken later in life. I think at this time Harry was probably in his late 20s or early 30s when he took that. I think he actually took the photo. So then, kind of, we're going to look at the next phase of his life. This is we're going to call this the printer's devil phase. So a printer's devil, if anybody knows, is usually a young person that works at a print shop. You got to remember, we're late 1800s here, and it was a very apparently very messy work. It would be covered in ink and just doing all the odd jobs around that had to do with printing. So I think that's where the devil's word comes from what I can find. They would just be covered in ink and just looked looked horrendous, probably. So this is when Harry comes back from the orphanage. We know he works several odd jobs around. We do know there are Civil War letters that written to his mother from his father that talk about how hard life was. So we know his mother was struggling, so Harry would have had to both worked on the farm and to do anything he could to help support the family. So we have evidence, actually, Harry's writing itself. He talks about working in a shingle mill for a while. He worked on the penny farm, which was a nursery, and he did other odd jobs. We also know that actually in the museum here we have a wagon that was called, it was the first firefighting equipment, a pumper wagon. So it was a wagon that would be filled with water, and several people would get on each side of it and pump handles, and that would pour water to wherever the fire was. And people would just keep refilling this wagon with buckets of water. Well, in 1878, Harry helped actually put out the log jail that was very near where the current museum is. He put a fire out there, and he was 15 years old at the time. And 1880, he experiences already another trauma in his life. His sister Clara dies after childbirth. So he's already lost a father. Now he's lost his sister. He doesn't. We haven't really found much writing about that So we don't really know how he felt about it, but it had to be hard. I think life was tough in the 1880s, and just kind of more evidence of it here. We know around this time he gets a job working for the Door County Advocate, which was the main local newspaper. There had actually been several newspapers, and the Advocate had some competitors, but I think the Advocate kind of was the longest running and most stable of all of them. His brother Ernest also worked there and was very well regarded. Ernest was known to be a real go-getter in the newspaper business, and I think Harry kind of saw Ernest as a bit of a mentor. And in 1883, Harry sets a typesetting record. He sets 25,500 lines of type in 18.75 hours. That must have just been grueling, but yeah, he held the record for that. And we know he's pretty young here, so he's really motivated. This is really setting his foundation as in the publishing field. So here's a picture of the Advocate building. We're not sure who the people in there. I don't think any of those are Harry, but we think this was the era that he was probably working in there. So as Harry gets a little older here, his brother Ernest and him decide to kind of branch out. 1883, Ernest and Harry they run the Calumet County News, and it almost sounds like, from what I can tell, that he bought it. We're not 100% sure about that, or that Ernest and him bought it together, but they were running it, and they did it for about a year, and it sounds like they sold it about a year after doing that. And in 1884, they both go to Milwaukee to work at the Sunday Star and other newspapers. And from this time, we have several accounts in the local newspapers here that talk about Harry and Ernest really being rising stars in the newspaper world, especially in Milwaukee. Milwaukee was just a new bustling city, a lot going on there, and Harry and Ernest were really up and coming rising stars that are making things happen. In 1890, Harry marries Annette Reinecke. Um, this is the love of his life, and we'll talk about that a little later on as and Harry as a father and a husband. But that was a big thing, a big event in his life. So. And then another tragedy strikes. Here we are in 1894. His brother Ernest dies. Now, at the time when we originally made this presentation, we couldn't find much information. It just mysteriously just says that Ernest had died in the newspapers and everything. We were having trouble finding his obituaries, but we did finally find it, and we think it was tuberculosis got him. So this had to be hard for Harry. Harry, I think he looked at Ernest as a mentor. Now he's lost a father, sister, and a brother. So he's had some hardship already, and he's a young man here, but he's also had some wonderful things happen. He marries Annette, and 1895, his son Harry Sylvester, or Syl as they refer to him, is born. And this is just the start of a wonderful period for Harry. Here's some photos of Harry. We think this was taken in Milwaukee from his newspaper days. That's him over on the right. Looking quite dapper, and I think this is a print shop there. We're not exactly sure. A lot of these photos, I will say, are courtesy of the Wisconsin Historical Society. So when Harry passed, we've got a lot of his collection, but some of it also made its way through various channels into the collection of the Wisconsin Historical Society. And if you go there to their website and just search Harry's name, you will find a lot of the images I'm showing here today, and just some wonderful things. Harry was an avid photographer, and so he really gives us a great snapshot of the late 1800s and early 1900s, especially in Milwaukee. You get a look of it, but he was coming home at the time and visiting often to Sturgeon Bay. So now we're going to talk about Harry the Storyteller. So this is really where Harry starts to blossom. So 1895 to 1905 is just an incredibly productive and creative time for him. He writes a series of adventure novels. These are the James Griffin Adventure series. There is the James Griffin Adventure in Alaska, the James Griffin Adventures in Land and Sea, and I think also the James Griffin Adventures in South Africa. Are really substantial books. These were high-end productions, nice embossed covers, and he was writing under, for some reason, we're not sure why, he was writing under the name of Harry D. at these. So, and he also did a lot of other writing. Both him and his wife Annette would put together. A paper that was geared specifically for young people. So this was kind of a niche of his that he was finding. He really had a connection with young people for some reason. Um, and he was also a pioneer in experimental photography at this time. So we know Harry had a camera and he was learning to use it quite well. So here's a card that actually Harry had made up. The picture of him says at 30 years old. I believe that was written by Harry himself at the top later in life. He wrote that. But this gives you a little bit idea of what was going on with him at the time. You know, he was has a lot of experience in the newspaper world. He's writing a lot of stories here, and let's go back to that original question about do these stories affect who we become later in life? Well, if you look down that list there, about halfway in the first block is the Harold Dale at School series, and this was about his time at the Soldiers' Orphanage Home in Madison. So I think we can already say that yes, obviously, uh, that time in the orphanage has affected his later life already. He's using this in the stories. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to find yet copies of these Harold Dale stories, but we are actively looking for them. So, talking about his photography at this time, so he was doing some incredibly innovative things. So, Harry, we think his studio was in Milwaukee at the time, was shooting these wonderfully staged scenes, and at first we didn't know what they were. So, he would take a bunch of actors, put them in costumes, and shoot them with a white screen or a white paper backdrop in there, and we were like, what is he doing? These are just wild photos. But we start looking at his books, and all of a sudden it kind of dawned on us like, oh, he was making these composite images. So the image on the left side is the photograph he took. This was taken from a glass negative of a photograph, and then he was working. I don't know if it was him, his wife, or some other artist, but they were creating these artistic compositions. If you look over on the right there, we see this same group of people. The people have actually been cut out and placed into an illustrated scene, and this is just a wonderful scene here. I think this comes from the Alaska book, James Griffin in Alaska, where they're standing around, they've got fire going, and the wolves are circling. So you can see this just wonderful creativity that's happening at the time. Here's another one where he's got some people staged in his studio, and just a wonderful scene here. And then over on the left side, we see that illustrated image, how it ended up being in the book. Here's another one, and this one's great because we actually get a glimpse of Harry himself over on the far left. He's looking back at the camera, holding a piece of paper, and snapping the picture at the same time. And we look at this picture, and then we were able to find in our archives, we actually have the final artwork of this particular one, and here it is. So you can see how he took those same people, cut them out, and they put it in this wonderfully illustrated backdrop. And I even love, at the bottom of this is the printer's notes on how they're going to reduce this and shoot it. It just really tells a whole story. Here's another one with Harry in it here, and he's directing some kids. And we think the youngest kid there is his son, Sylvester. Um, and I think one of the other kids from Harry's writing was the son of the the heirs of the Pabst Brewery, and once again, kind of establishing that we think this happened in Milwaukee at the time. Here's another one here, just a wonderful scene of somebody's, having a there's a holdup going on here. So we haven't seen the final artwork of this one yet, but I'm looking forward to finding it. And here's a close up. This is another. We do have actual several of the final art panels from the James Griffin in Alaska series, and this is a close up of one. And you can see how masterfully these photos have been worked into this illustrated background. They're just wonderful. This is a particular area of mine I'm interested in. I kind of grew up. My career was started in graphic design, and so these just absolutely fascinated me when we were able to find them. All right, now we're going to talk about Harry the father and the husband. So um, we know that Annette at the time was helping him with both writing and publishing. They kind of co-published the newspaper. It was kind of a newspaper magazine geared towards young people. We know Annette was also a painter. See, we have a painting here in the museum. That's just a wonderful painting that Annette did, and they absolutely adored their son Syl. There's so many pictures here, and you can just see the love in those pictures. Um, Harry, you, this was probably the height of his photography period because it's just many, many pictures of Syl. And we know they were living in Milwaukee at the time, but we also know that through his writings that they would frequent their visits home to Sturgeon Bay. His mother still lived here, and I think his brother Walter were still here. Um, so they came home quite often, and Harry would describe those trips, and there's even some photographs of them back in Sturgeon Bay at the time. We also know from this time that Annette had chronic health issues, so we don't see her in quite as many of the photos, um, and then we don't know what her issues were exactly, but yeah, she had a chronic health condition going on. Here's some wonderful photos. Over on the left is a young Syl, very long hair at the time. That is a picture of Annette there. It's probably annoyed with Harry taking the picture. We got here's Harry and Syl lighting fireworks. I'm assuming probably for the 4th of July. Here we have a picture on the left of, I think this is from Easter. They were looking at the things they had found around the yard. There's some Easter eggs and different things like that. Um, we have the lower right picture, I think, is Harry's taking in a picture there. You can see the cord to the camera is still in his hand, and the boys are, I don't know if they're fighting there or if that was something that Harry was directing them to stage a scene or not, or if they were just being boys. Who knows? And then also on the upper right there is, we think this is a picture from Sturgeon Bay, actually, on one of their trips home where they're fishing off one of the docks here in Sturgeon Bay. Here's a family shot. Um, that's Harry right there in the front with the hat on. You can tell he's holding something in his hand. That is probably the control for the camera. That's Syl sitting on the ground next to him. I think it's Annette that's up behind Syl. We we're not exactly sure who everyone else in the photo is, but we've got some ideas we're working on trying to get them all identified. And here's just a wonderful picture. This is Syl. I absolutely adore this picture, and you can just see Harry's love for his son through this. And that actually, the person in the background is known as Aunt Helen. We were thinking this is Annette's sister. We're not 100% sure. We're still trying to track down who exactly Helen was, but Helen appears in a lot of the photos too. So, and this is where it gets a little sad. I'm going to warn you. Things are just going great for Harry. He's in an incredibly creative period of his life. But in 1907, Syl gets sick, and they move to New Mexico in order to hopefully improve his health. I don't know if they knew exactly at the time what was going on, but we come to find out that it was probably diabetes, and he passed away shortly after their move there at just 12 years old. And to make matters even worse, just a couple months later, Annette finally passes too. I, I know she had chronic health issues, but you got to think that she really probably died of a broken heart here. It's just absolutely tragic. And this is just has just half to shatter Harry's world. I can't imagine it. I don't. I think any parent worst nightmare would be for this, and then to lose your spouse at the same time just had to be devastating to him. So let's talk about Harry the survivor. Harry returns to Sturgeon Bay. We're not exactly sure of the year he comes back, but we know in 1908 he purchased property on Bayshore Drive that's just north on the Bayside. This is property for Sylvan Lodge. This has been a dream of his. He also, at this time, invests in a mining operation in Wyoming. And unfortunately, that doesn't go well. He had two other partners. Um, Basically, I don't think they made any money. I think Harry lost all of his investment in there. We're not sure exactly how much he did invest. It's still something we're kind of looking at in documents. But yeah, we know it didn't go well. He does continue some work in publishing. We know while in Sturgeon Bay, there was some issues with the banks, and um, in frustration, he wasn't getting stuff published in the regular papers at the time, so he started his own free press where he kind of specifically talks about the banks, and once again, we're in the era of the Great Depression here or entering it, and so he talks a lot about these bank collapses and people losing money. I'm assuming Harry probably lost even more money in that. So you can see he was probably doing quite well financially. We don't know for sure, but we have pictures of his house in Milwaukee, and it looked like he was living a nice, probably middle to upper class life. And after the death of Annette and Syl, things aren't going so well anymore. So, and we know that this is a time that Harry starts to collect things because he does write about collecting a little bit and saving things, and um, he actually would put up displays around town in windows of banks and stores. Anybody basically that would let him uh, display things, and that's probably the seeds of his museum aspirations. So here's a few photos of that time period. Um, this is Harry, the photo on the left here. That's Harry that's closest to us. We think the two gentlemen with the mustaches, we think those may have been his mining partners. We're not 100% sure. Um, but the gentleman with the beard was a local publisher working at the Advocate. Was a dear friend of Harry's, and so there's several pictures with him. Uh, Pictures over on the right are from one of their mining trips out west. I think the top right one is they're on the top of Pikes Peak. I think Harry's holding a chunk of probably painted rock that looks like gold. Um, Classic tourist photo probably at the time. Also, he's kind of in his Wild West garb down in the lower photo in front of a cabin, and I think they're out there prospecting. We What we can ascertain is that this was not a gold mining operation that they were investing in, but copper mining. Um, Copper was very in demand at the time, but for whatever reason, this did not work out. Here's another wonderful photo. There's Harry in the background. Um, I think this is probably taken over on the uh, indoor county over on the Bayshore, Bayside. And here is a little bit from Sylvan Lodge. So this was Harry's dream. He bought the property and built it up over time. And I'm just going to read to you the first sentence or two. So And these are Harry's words. Harry says, about 50 years ago, when planning someday to retire in a country place with my wife and my son Sylvester, I painted a small sign with the name Sylvan Lodge. And obviously, Sylvan, Syl, there's a tie in there with his son's name. Um, this is very important to him. And as that is the name I was to give it. Matters turned out differently, but I did finally alone open up my dream place. That just breaks my heart when I read that. But at least he was able to persevere enough and open up his dream place here. We do know that Harry, I think he had some financial difficulties. He did later sell Sylvan Lodge. Um, and I think things weren't so good for him. From what we can tell, he was living, a neighbor uh, let him live in a shack on his property for a while, and we've had several accounts that say that it was not a great living experience. So we actually talked to some people that helped clean it up after Harry's passing, and they said it was pretty sad actually. Now Harry did have a lot of things, and that's where a lot of our collection and information about Harry came from. So fortunately, those things were preserved. And Harry did do some things in that time period. So this we're kind of back up to uh, the time of the ideas of the museum. So in the background there on the left, we see this was actually an early design of the museum, not what it ended up looking like. We think this design was actually done by Crandall, who we think the final museum design was done by Bernhardt. So we think Crandall and Bernhardt were kind of almost in competition to design the museum. I think it went back and forth a little bit, but ultimately we think it was a cost issue. They had to scale this down. Interestingly enough, if you look at the title, it says the Door County Museum and Chamber of Commerce. So at the time they were planning on sharing a space. I think Harry was actually planning on maybe living in this building too. He was, like I said, wasn't doing too well at the time and living basically in a shack up on Bayshore Drive. And we know when the museum finally did open in '39, for a while he lived, there was a space in the attic that he lived at. He also he was still in publishing at the time, so Harry wrote. He dedicated much of this time to writing this book about the Ice Age and the history of the Earth. The book is largely a lot of his correspondence with a geologist friend of his. His main theory in the book was something about that the Ice Age was created in his theory by the changing of the Earth's magnetic pull. I don't think it's has withstood the test of time. I've tried to read some of this. It kind of rambles on, and it's not necessarily a great textbook on the Earth's history. But he was busy, and it's not like he was doing nothing at the time. So, and then this wonderful tourist map over on the side. This was created by Harry, and so we know Harry did a series of these and was keeping busy and staying in publishing and doing these maps were originally kind of a paste up project, and he would write and draw things on them. So he was still using his talents. So that brings us to the question. Do you think that why do you think Harry wanted to build a museum? We don't know. We don't we have a lot of writings from Harry, but we don't really have him coming out to say exactly why he did it. He obviously liked history and wanted to preserve history, but I could speculate that I think Harry was really trying to preserve the memories of his wife and his son, and maybe even his siblings and his father to some degree, because he was successful in that. We have here in the museum today, we have Christmas gifts that were under the Christmas tree for Syl that we know are toys that belong to Syl. We have the paintings that Annette did that are just wonderful. We have some furniture for their house, different things. We have all the history, the letters We don't have the actual letters themselves, but we have copies of the letters that his father wrote to his mother um, when he was in the Civil War. So, and they're just incredible to read. So, I really think Harry, part of his drive to build a museum um, was to preserve those personal memories. And even though ultimately the museum has gone on to preserve the memories of many people in Door County and to cover our county's history in general, um, you got to think there was still the motivation that he, this devastation of his that happened in his life to lose a child and a spouse, um, he wanted to preserve that. And we also think, through discussions when we originally presented this slideshow here, some people had speculated that I thought was really smart that part of maybe part of forming the museum was also to regain a family, and we think this is a time in Harry's life that uh, he started calling himself and other people started calling him Uncle Harry. So in a way, having the museum, he had a family again, and that actually makes me very happy to think about. I think that's very true. Um, I think he was loved by the community in his time at the museum here. Uh, like I said, we've talked to a few people that had actually met him back in the day, and they said he was just charming and wonderful, and the kids love to hang out here. So yeah, I think that's very plausible that not only was he preserving memories of loved ones, but he was also recreating a new family too. So there you go. That's kind of a quick story of Harry, and I think, like me, once I found out some of the details of his life and his creative journey and his the ups and the highs and the lows, I really do appreciate him and what he did so much more. And we'll leave you here with something that he has carved into the mantle over the fireplace that still exists here in the museum. The past, the present, and the future cannot be separated. And this is very true, especially now. I think of this as I work here at the museum. I see some things in my life that kind of mirror what Harry's life happened. Not necessarily the tragedy so much, but some of the creative journey. And here I am, basically doing his job that he started so long ago. So I feel very fortunate to be here and to be part of that story and see it continue into the future. So, thank you everybody for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this, and this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. We're finding out more about Harry and his family all the time because so many documents and photos were preserved through both our collection and at the Wisconsin Historical Society. Um, so come back to the museum, visit. We do hope someday to actually have a more of a detailed display and about Harry himself and his story. So we hope to see you here. Thank you.